I kind of fell down a wormhole of reading a couple of fantasy books and a couple of Chinese dramas. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Nicole and I'm a second year medical student studying at CUHK. And today I just wanted to make a video talking about the past few weeks, specifically starting in mid-March. I tried catching up with 2 months worth of lectures within 2 weeks. So today I just wanted to share things that worked for me and things that didn't work, in hopes that this video can also help you achieve your goal of catching up with all the lectures or any work that you're falling behind on. So before I start, let's just allow me to quickly explain why I was 2 months behind on lectures. I kind of fell down a wormhole of reading a couple of fantasy books and a couple of Chinese dramas. Stay tuned for future videos on the reading wormhole that I did fall into. And without further ado, let's get started. First of all, when I started planning out how I was going to cover 2 months worth of lectures within 2 weeks of time, I did the math and it came out to doing around 3 to 5 lectures every day. And it was precisely me doing this math and planning out the number of lectures that I needed to complete every day that this was my first mistake and just did not work for me. When I set the goal for myself to do 3 to 5 lectures every single day I failed to meet the goal, and every single day I felt more stressed and I just felt terrible about myself because I wasn't meeting the expectations that I had set for myself. I felt bad about not being productive enough, and this just built on itself and I felt less productive. I didn't want to sit down at my desk and start watching a lecture and taking notes, and I also fell behind. So this was the first mistake that I made. And I highly recommend that when you create a study schedule for yourself, number one, be realistic, and also just don't be that harsh on yourself. I know looking back that trying to finish all my lectures in 2 weeks was a pretty crazy goal, but I wanted to push my limits, and I'm still glad that I did. But I also think that it's very important that you re-evaluate your progress every couple of days to make sure that you're setting a reasonable goal for yourself so that you just don't overwhelm yourself, because when you overwhelm yourself, you will end up burning out, and that's kind of what happened to me. The second thing that didn't work for me when I was trying to catch up on lectures was setting a deliberate and delegating a specific time in my day to working. My general workflow was watching a lecture and then creating an Anki card for those lectures. So after watching a lecture, I would usually pull up the PowerPoint again and go through it and make Anki cards for all the concepts I didn't know. But the issue was that I would first watch the lecture. That was the easy part, because I was just passively listening to it and I generally understood the concepts. But when it came time to making the Anki cards, this was the stressful part. And in my mind, I mentally built up the image that creating Anki cards was going to be a lot of work. This was especially the case with lectures that had a lot of text on the slides. I would often feel very overwhelmed with all the content that was being taught, so I would procrastinate. I would still listen to my lecture because that was the easy part, but I would procrastinate on making Anki cards, and at the end of the day, there was no point in me watching a lecture if I wasn't going to make an Anki card about it, because that's the way that I solidify my knowledge and make sure that I'm actually not only learning and understanding it, but also memorizing the concept and committing it to my long-term memory. I would usually watch a lecture in the morning, but I would procrastinate for almost 2 or 3 days before I sat down to make the Anki cards, because my brain thought that this was going to be both a physically and mentally painful process. And I find that one of the biggest problems we often have is the mental image that we built about the problems that we're facing. Whereas when we actually write it down or just do it and try it once, we realize that it's actually not that bad. Our biggest barrier is our own mental framework of how the world works. Because I thought that making Anki cards was going to be hard, I would procrastinate, and I perceived that as being very hard. But after giving it a few tries and mixing up the timing that I did Anki cards, instead of waiting 2 to 3 days after watching a lecture to make cards, if I did it right afterwards, it actually wasn't too bad. From there, I actually set the goal for myself that I would create the Anki card for the respective lecture on the same day that I watched the lecture to ensure that I was making cards in a timely manner and I wasn't procrastinating. Now, moving on to the things that did work when I was trying to cover 2 months worth of lectures in 2 weeks. First of all, what worked best for me was using the Pomodoro technique. So for those of you guys who might not know, Pomodoro is basically the idea where you work for 25 minutes or a dedicated interval of time, and then it's followed by a 5-minute break. For me, what I did was 25 minutes plus a 5-minute break, but it wasn't exactly doing work and then rest and then work again that worked best, but actually counting the number of Pomodoro sessions I did. What I would do is I actually had an app on my desktop, and every time I started working, I would hit start and it would start counting down with the Pomodoro. The best part of this app is that it would tell me the number of Pomodoro sessions I had completed that day at the end of the day. And looking at that number was really encouraging. On a good day, I would usually get anywhere from 8 to 10 Pomodoro sessions, so these are 25 sessions. So this was actually just around 2 hours of work, which doesn't really sound a lot. And I found that by looking and focusing at the number of Pomodoro sessions I did, seeing that value was actually very motivating for me to keep working. I saw that I was making progress, and I would actually track this every day by using tallies. Tallying the number of Pomodoro sessions I did that day was actually more motivating than just writing down the actual number, because I was writing down individual short lines to count off the number of Pomodoro sessions I did that day. So this is something that I would highly recommend for people, especially if you're only working around 2 to 3 hours. Just having 2 or 3 tallies wasn't motivating enough. But if I counted the number of Pomodoro sessions, which is only 25 minutes, I had a larger number of tallies to write down. Tracking this daily was just something that was very encouraging for me to do, and I tried to keep the streak. And it also just helped build the habit of sitting down at my desk and trying to build discipline when I was working. I would only take breaks after the timer went off. So if I saw that I had 5 minutes, but I wanted to get up and walk around the house, I would force myself to stay put until the session was done, so that I could count this as a full Pomodoro session. The second thing I realized was the importance of experimenting with different workflows. For the most part, I stuck to using Anki, but I experimented with the different timing of making Anki cards. Specifically, would I make Anki cards before, during, or after the lecture? I found that previously I was usually making cards after the lecture, but I actually found that based on the type of lecture I was watching, it was sometimes more beneficial for me to make Anki cards beforehand, or for me to pause and play the lecture while making Anki cards. So after experimenting with a couple of different formats, I found that it really just depends on the type of lecture that I was working on. So for some lectures that had a lot of memorization, such as anatomy lectures, some of the pharmacology lectures, I would actually make Anki cards before I watched the lecture, and I would try to review these Anki cards beforehand too, so that when I started listening to the lecture, I was actually primed and I had a good background about what the lecture was talking about. After I made these Anki cards, while I was watching the lecture, I would sometimes reopen up Anki and add some quick notes to the cards that I already made to clarify some concepts that I might not have fully understood when I was making Anki cards beforehand. But in general, having the cards made beforehand and reviewing them made it a lot easier for me to absorb the information that the professor was teaching. For other forms of lectures, mainly those that weren't as memorization heavy, or the lectures that didn't have a lot of text on the slides, I would make Anki cards while watching the lecture, because the pacing of the lecture was okay. The information wasn't too overwhelming, and it ensured that when I was taking notes, I wasn't doing it twice, because usually I would take notes on the lecture slides, and then transfer those notes into Anki cards. But by making Anki cards directly while watching the lecture, I wasn't taking notes twice. Finally, if the lecture had a medium amount of words, so mainly most of my genetic lectures, I would listen to the lecture during the morning. So usually the first thing I would do when I woke up is I would open up my phone, pull up the lecture recorder, and start playing. And this sounds a bit hectic, but hear me out. I'm a total morning person, and I find that I concentrate the best during like the first 2 to 3 hours of me waking up. So I would listen to the lecture as I was getting ready in the morning, and by the time I was eating breakfast, I was done with the lecture, and I felt so good about it, and my day just felt so successful already. After I finished listening to the lecture, I would immediately open up my laptop and start making Anki cards. I would make sure that I would make Anki cards for that lecture on the same day, preferably before 12, and this made sure that I had a deadline for myself, so work expands to fill the time allotted to it. If I set the deadline at 12 noon, I would make sure that I would get those cards in. Along the way, I also learned to accept that I don't have to know every single minute detail. Coming to terms with that was so relieving because it just took some of the stress off of myself. Previously, I was basically trying to memorize every single word in the lecture, but that isn't how you're supposed to learn. And for the most part, I just was trying to be more forgiving of myself. The joy that I got out of finishing a lecture and making Anki cards for that lecture in the morning was just so worth it, and it felt like I was starting the day off on the right foot. Now, I do understand that many of you guys may not be morning people, and I just advise you to use your time wisely in the morning, because for me, I found that I was wasting a lot of my time in the morning by just mindlessly scrolling through Instagram or YouTube or just browsing Reddit, when this time could have just been used to watch a lecture and just quickly make Anki cards afterwards. And that was the most productive thing that I've been doing during those 2 weeks in order to catch up with all the lectures that I fell behind on. Moving on from experimenting with different workflows, I found that one of the most important things that I learned was setting non-negotiables. Set something or multiple things in your day that you have to get done, because these are the things that will keep you sane. For me, this was exercising daily and finishing my Anki reviews. So as for exercising, I aimed to get in 1 hour of exercise every day, unless I was out in the morning or I was out in the afternoon and I was just feeling really physically exhausted. I would usually do a workout at home, or I would walk outside for an hour. I tried to have this time for myself for it to be a good break from studying and have a change in environment. Besides exercising, my second non-negotiable was actually finishing all my Anki reviews due for that day. So my Anki review count has been up in like the hundreds, like 200 or 300 cards. And sometimes they take me forever to do because the cards I made for myself were kind of hard and I was not really remembering all the concepts well. But by finishing my Anki reviews every day, it was something that kept me feeling good about myself, because I could say I was productive today. Even though I didn't meet my goal of getting 3 to 5 lectures cleared, I finished my Anki reviews. And this is one of the reasons why I really like Anki, because the cards I was seeing were concepts that would be coming up on the upcoming exam. There were cards on cardiovascular physiology, biochemistry every day. And while I was still trying to catch up on everything that I fell behind on, I was also doing a bit of revision already. In general, finishing the Anki reviews gave me a sense of comfort. It prevented me from beating myself up for not meeting the goal that I had set that day, because hey, at least I finished my Anki reviews. Finally, besides setting non-negotiables, one of the most important things I've learned was the importance of setting an overarching goal. My goal was simply to finish the lectures in 2 weeks, and more importantly, to make a reflective YouTube video about it. And part of this intrinsic motivation of creating a YouTube video out of it kept me slightly more accountable. Knowing that I was going to make a YouTube video about how I was trying to kick myself into being a productive student for once actually made me semi-productive, because I told myself that I would be making this video regardless of the results. Additionally, by setting this overarching goal, I was kind of tapping into Parkinson's law, which is the idea that work expands to fill the time allotted to it. If I set the goal for 2 weeks, hopefully my work will compress itself to be completed within these 2 weeks. Now, this didn't exactly work because I should have set shorter term goals, maybe daily goals that were not exactly I need to do 3 to 5 lectures a day, but rather I want to get 10 Pomodoro sessions done today. Something like that, which is easier for me to measure and it's like an input goal, would have been a better idea, and moving forward, that's what I'm gonna be doing. So at the end of the day, did I beat my goal? Not exactly, but I got pretty close. I was around 5 lectures behind at the end of the 2 weeks, which granted I felt pretty good about myself about that. So I want to just end this video with saying measure the gain, not the gap. I think it's sometimes that we lose sight of how far we've come and the progress we've made, the obstacles that we've overcome, because we're so fixated on the destination. We're so fixated on the end goal and the ideal situation that we want to be at. Ideally, I would have finished all my lectures. Ideally, I would be prepared and I would be revising already. But that's not always the case. And I also just need to appreciate the fact that I've come so far. I've cleared so many lectures. I've made Anki cards and I've incorporated it into my study schedule. And these are all the things that I've gained. So ultimately, measure the gain, not the gap. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, check out my other videos about studying, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!